Picture this, it's the middle of World War I. The British Empire is stretched to its absolute limit. And right in the middle of all that chaos, a single statement gets made in London, a statement that would completely change the future of India. This wasn't some grand treaty signed on a battlefield. Nope, this was a promise made under immense pressure. A promise that started India on a very slow, very deliberate, and pretty controversial road to governing itself. And that really gets to the heart of the whole thing, doesn't it? I mean, how do you promise something as big and absolute as freedom, but then say you're going to deliver it in tiny little pieces on a schedule that only you control? That's the puzzle at the core of the 1917 August Declaration. So to really get this declaration, you have to transport yourself back to 1917. Britain is neck-deep in the First World War, and it's leaning heavily on India for both soldiers and resources. At the same time, back in India, nationalist movements are really picking up steam, demanding more of a say in their own country. The whole situation was a pressure cooker, just waiting to blow, and the British government knew they couldn't just sit on the lid forever. Yeah, this timeline really shows you the perfect storm brewing. On one side, you have this incredible sacrifice being made by Indian soldiers fighting in the war, and on the other, you have all this political pressure building up back home. It was just unavoidable. So when Edwin Montague gets the job of Secretary of State for India in July 1917, he basically reads the room. He knew that making some kind of public promise about political change wasn't just a nice gesture, it was absolutely necessary to keep India on their side for the rest of the war. Okay, so in August of 1917, Britain makes its move. The August Declaration, which you'll also hear called the Montague Declaration, was their official answer. And honestly, it was a masterclass in political chess, just a really carefully worded statement that was designed to give just enough hope to keep people happy, but without actually giving up any real power. Let's just stop and really look at these words. This was huge. I mean, for the very first time, the British government officially said that responsible government, which is basically self-government, was the end goal for India. Before this, the whole idea was that British rule was permanent, like a parent looking after a child. This statement just threw that whole idea out the window. It was a total game changer. But here it is. Here's the catch. The promise was massive, but the timeline, completely up in the air. The declaration made one thing perfectly clear. This progressive realization of self-government would be slow, it would be measured, and it would be decided entirely by the British Parliament. So this is the really crucial part. Britain basically made itself the judge, the jury, and the executioner of India's readiness for freedom. They said, we'll be the ones to assess your political maturity. We'll watch how you develop your own institutions. And then we, and only we, will decide when you're ready for the next step. It left them in complete and total control of the pace. Now, as you can probably guess, a promise like this, so huge on one hand, but so full of conditions on the other, it didn't exactly get a uniform welcome in India. It completely split Indian political opinion, and you got this whole spectrum of reactions, from pure celebration to some very deep suspicion. You can really see that split right here. Take the moderates, they saw this as a massive win. For them, it was proof that their way of doing things, through constitutional reform, was actually working. The Indian National Congress as a whole said, okay, this is a welcome step, but they immediately called it out for being too vague and too slow. And then for the extremist leaders, like Tilak and Annie Besant, it was just not nearly enough. Meanwhile, the Muslim League mostly saw it as a good step forward. It was one promise that meant totally different things to different groups. But here's the thing. No matter what all these different groups thought at the time, one thing is absolutely certain. The August Declaration was a massive, fundamental turning point in India's fight for independence. And why is that? Well, because it was the official end of an era. That old excuse of a permanent paternalistic British rule was just gone. Now there was a new official policy of eventual constitutional reform, no matter how slow they planned to make it. The goalposts had officially been moved. And this wasn't just talk either. This declaration was the direct blueprint for the Government of India Act of 1919. That act brought in this really complicated system called diarchy. Now, what that meant was, for the first time ever, elected Indian legislators got control over certain provincial departments, things like education and health. But, and this is a big but, all the really important stuff, finance, the police, law and order, that all stayed firmly in British hands. So, yeah, it was a tiny, very calculated step, but it was a step that happened directly because of that 1917 promise. And maybe the most important thing of all is that this declaration gave the nationalist movement a whole new kind of leverage. For the first time, Britain had put its promise of self-government down on paper. And now, Indian leaders could hold them to it. The argument was no longer about if India should govern itself, but when and how fast. That British promise became the new baseline they could fight against. So, all of this leaves us with one final big question. Was the August Declaration a genuine change of heart, a real concession, or was it just a brilliant political move to keep things calm during the war, a way to buy loyalty with a promise of freedom that could be put off forever? The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But what we know for sure is that after August 1917, the road to independence was still going to be long and hard, but for the very first time, it had a destination that was officially in sight.